When you conduct a literature review or observe a work environment, you are immediately confronted with a chaotic, entangled web of qualitative ideas. Dozens of behaviors, environmental factors, and historical precedents all seem to affect one another at the same time. You cannot directly test this qualitative mess using statistical analysis. Mathematical models require precise inputs, and raw field observations are simply too noisy and unstructured to process. To move from observation to testing, researchers construct a theoretical framework. This framework acts as a rigorous translation layer, distilling complex, real-world phenomena into specific, isolated variables. Without a theoretical framework, empirical data lacks meaning. The framework provides the structural engine that makes hypothetico-deductive research possible, turning abstract observations into a logical map that can actually be measured. Every conceptual model begins by identifying the dependent variable. This is the primary phenomenon of interest. It is the specific outcome the researcher ultimately wants to explain or predict. Next is the independent variable. This is the presumed causal factor. When the independent variable changes, it accounts for the specific, measurable variance that we observe happening in the dependent variable. This diagram shows a foundational model. We have workforce diversity acting as our independent variable and organizational effectiveness as our dependent variable. The arrow indicates our theory that increasing diversity directly influences effectiveness. To scientifically claim that this independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, 4 strict conditions must be met. The 2 variables must covary. The independent variable must precede the dependent variable in time. Other possible factors must be controlled. And finally, there must be a logical theory explaining exactly why this effect occurs. Establishing this unidirectional, basic relationship is the absolute minimum requirement to begin causal research. However, a simple A to B model rarely reflects the true complexity of human behavior or organizational dynamics. The primary flaw in relying solely on basic independent and dependent variables is that in the social sciences, cause and effect relationships are almost never absolute. To accurately model reality, researchers introduce the moderating variable. A moderator is a third factor that modifies the original relationship, exerting a strong contingent effect on whether the independent variable actually influences the dependent variable. Returning to our case study, we can introduce managerial expertise as a moderating variable. The theoretical interaction works like this. Putting people of different backgrounds in a room only yields high organizational effectiveness if the manager possesses the expertise to harness those diverse talents. If the manager lacks that skill, the potential synergy remains completely untapped. Plotting effectiveness against diversity reveals the theoretical interaction. We see 2 distinct slopes based on managerial expertise. For high expertise, a steep positive green line. For low expertise, a flat red line. Increasing diversity here yields 0 additional effectiveness. While independent variables explain variance, moderating variables dictate boundary conditions. They prove specifically when or for whom a relationship holds. Boundary conditions tell us when an effect happens, leaving us with a black box problem. They do not explain the temporal gap between the cause and the effect. We have to ask, by what exact mechanism does putting diverse people in a room actually generate higher organizational effectiveness? To model this mechanism, researchers use a mediating variable. This is a factor that surfaces between the time the independent variable starts operating and the time its impact is finally felt on the dependent variable. In our ongoing model, we will define creative synergy as the mediating variable. This timeline illustrates the sequence for mediation. Workforce diversity at time 1 generates creative synergy at time 2, leading to organizational effectiveness at time 3. The mediator surfaces from the independent variable, then becomes the direct cause driving the dependent variable. While moderators dictate conditions of change, mediating variables model the actual process. They conceptualize exactly why the independent variable works in the first place. To accurately reflect the dynamics of a real organization, we must combine both boundary conditions and temporal mechanisms into a single, unified conceptual model. In highly structured models, a moderator can act specifically on the first half of a mediation. Our complete theory posits that managerial expertise specifically moderates whether or not workforce diversity can successfully generate creative synergy. This fully integrated multivariate architecture shows diversity flowing into synergy, then effectiveness. Managerial expertise acts as the gatekeeper. If the manager fails, removing the moderator, the link to synergy breaks. But with a capable manager, the relationship holds, and organizational effectiveness is achieved. This complex multivariate architecture is the ultimate output of a thorough literature review. It provides a complete, logical map of reality that is now ready to be tested against empirical data. A conceptual model is scientifically useless until it is translated into mathematical predictions. Researchers do this by developing hypotheses. A hypothesis is a tentative, testable statement predicting exactly what you expect to find in your empirical data. When previous literature provides a clear theoretical basis, researchers use a directional hypothesis. This means stating the precise nature of the relationship, using terms like positive, negative, or greater than. For example, we formally state, workforce diversity has a positive effect on organizational effectiveness. If previous research is conflicting, or if the relationship has never been explored, researchers rely on non-directional hypotheses. These postulate that a relationship exists, but offer no indication of which direction the variance will trend. Formalizing these exact predictions before analyzing the data is a critical safeguard. It prevents researchers from retroactively shifting their claims to match random statistical noise they happen to find in their sample. The hypothetico-deductive method operates on one core philosophical rule. Hypotheses must be inherently falsifiable. They must be written in a way that allows empirical data to show them to be false. There is a common professional misconception about this process. Researchers cannot strictly prove an alternate hypothesis to be undeniably true. Instead, every prediction is accompanied by its mandatory counterpart, the null hypothesis. The null state is the absolute presumption of zero variance, zero relationship, or zero difference between groups. It implies that any observed correlation in the data is simply due to random sampling fluctuations. This split-screen graphic translates theory into mathematical notation. The null hypothesis states the correlation between variables equals zero. Statistical analyses are run for one purpose, confidently rejecting this null state. By proving the null unlikely, researchers support their alternate hypothesis. By convention in the social sciences, rejecting the null requires a 95% confidence level. There must be a 5% or less chance that the observed relationship is a random anomaly. A rigorous theoretical framework does two things. It precisely structures chaotic reality through careful variable selection, and it exposes that structure to the ruthless, objective judgment of statistical testing.